The United States didn't just become the world's largest economy by accident. Its economic dominance is a result of strategic manipulation of the global financial system, built on the foundations of war, diplomacy, and monetary supremacy. From printing money out of thin air to controlling oil sales, the US created an economic empire. But how exactly did it do that? How did one country manage to dominate trade, finance, and development across the globe? Let's unravel the hidden story. In 1944, as World War II was winding down, 44 nations met in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to shape the post-war financial order. They agreed to make the US dollar the central reserve currency, pegged to gold at $35 per ounce. All other currencies were pegged to the dollar. At that time, the US held about two-thirds of the world's gold reserves, giving it massive credibility. This agreement not only stabilized post-war economies, but cemented the US as the banker of the world. Global trade, development loans, and currency reserves now revolved around the dollar. However, by the late 1960s, US spending soared due to the Vietnam War and President Johnson's Great Society programs. The government printed more dollars than it had in gold, leading to inflation and a crisis of confidence. In 1971, President Richard Nixon unilaterally ended the dollar's convertibility to gold, effectively collapsing the Bretton Woods system. The dollar became a fiat currency, backed by nothing but trust. Still, it remained the global standard because of its entrenchment in trade and finance. Between 1971 and today, the US national debt has grown from $398 billion to over $34 trillion, much of it held by foreign creditors who still trust the dollar. After delinking from gold, the US gained the ability to print money without limits. While this led to inflation at home, reaching 13.5% in 1980, the bigger impact was abroad. Other nations were forced to devalue their own currencies to maintain competitiveness. Latin America, Africa, and Southeast Asia suffered from capital flight and currency collapses. By 2023, over 60% of all global foreign exchange reserves were still held in US dollars, according to the IMF. This allowed the US to run persistent trade deficits without consequence, essentially importing goods and exporting inflation. In the 1980s and 90s, institutions like the International Monetary Fund and World Bank, both heavily influenced by the US, imposed structural adjustment programs on developing countries. In exchange for loans, nations were forced to privatize state industries, cut public spending, and open their markets. The result? Widespread poverty, unemployment, and a loss of sovereignty. For example, Zambia spent more on repaying debt than on health and education combined in the 1990s. Meanwhile, American corporations entered these economies, bought up assets cheaply, and repatriated the profits. It was a new form of economic colonization. In 1974, the US struck a deal with Saudi Arabia. In exchange for weapons and protection, the Saudis would sell oil exclusively in dollars. This created the Petrodollar system, forcing every oil importing nation to hold US dollars. Today, oil trade is worth over $2 trillion annually, and nearly all of it is still conducted in dollars. When countries tried to break free, like Iraq in 2000 or Libya in 2010, they were quickly sanctioned or invaded. This system is underpinned not just by finance but by force. The US spends over $877 billion a year on defense, more than the next 10 countries combined. Despite growing challenges from China, Russia, and the BRICS nations, the US dollar still dominates. 80% of global trade is invoiced in dollars, and 90% of forex transactions involve it. This isn't just economic dominance, it's strategic control. From Bretton Woods to the Petrodollar, from printed trillions to IMF interventions, the US built a system that ensures global dependence on its currency. But as multipolar forces rise, the world may finally be ready to challenge the empire of the dollar. The question is, Will it succeed?